I think many people will agree that that story is the foundation of everything that exists within the wrestling industry. And so I have a little bit of a story of my own. Years ago, when I was writing for Slam Wrestling, I was in my rookie years and still kind of finding my way as a pro wrestling journalist. And then I eventually came across someone who was in a similar boat that I was, except on the other side of the business. She was a 19-year-old student, and while already taking indie bookings at the time, she was still kind of learning the ropes, pardon the pun, within the wrestling industry. So today I have the pleasure of speaking with her once again. To friends and family, she is known as Jane Marushnikova, but of course, wrestling fans know her best as Nikita. So, Nikita, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I hope I pronounce your last name correctly, by the way.
I was actually quite impressed. Like most people really butcher it, which I don't blame them. So I was like, oh, he's going for it. But yeah, you did a good job.
Yeah, I have a last name that most often gets butchered, as you can imagine, with the European last name. So I take that very seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
So do I. I always try to make sure I'm like, I need to read this person's name because nothing's worse than people trying to say it and they're like, and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, that's fine.
So, of course, my listeners are anxious to hear your story as we spoke about stories earlier on. So, why don't we start from the very beginning? Now, you came to Canada at a very young age. You were, of course, born in the Ukraine. Was there a big wrestling culture over there?
Oh, there was zero, at least back then. Like I had no idea what pro wrestling was, never been exposed to it. Ukraine at the time, and I'm sure it's quite similar now, just due to being a war-torn country and just a country that's a bit more third world than people realize. It like we didn't really have much on TV. Like if you're growing up there in the 90s, it's like growing up here in the 70s. Like it was very years back. So I've never seen WWE or anything even close to that on TV. Like we would have boxing. That's kind of all I knew in terms of any kind of combat sports. But there was nothing, like nobody, even to this day, like talking to some of my family, like some of them are still like, what is that? So I don't think it's a very big scene there. And I didn't discover it until I came here.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I went back and reread the original Slam story that I wrote, and you mentioned that you had kind of got into it after watching it with your dad back in the day. I'm assuming that would have been in Canada.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So my dad, obviously being a huge sports fan, so what one of the things we used to do in Ukraine was watch boxing because that was one of the only sports that they would play. So he was kind of looking for something like that here, trying to figure out what channels they had for boxing. And then we came across pro wrestling, which obviously neither of us have seen. So it was kind of like, oh, what's this? So my dad would watch it and he'd kind of be like, oh, Jane, come sit down, come watch, TV with me. And I remember the very first time I watched it, I was like, what the hell is this? I was so confused. I was like, I've never seen this. And like at first I was like, I don't know if I like it. But then I think like once I watched like an hour of it, it was just I was instantly hooked and that was kind of it.
Yeah, so tell me a little about then your journey. Well, firstly, I wanted to ask actually about your early life in Canada. Was it hard to adapt to some of the customs here, or were there a lot of cultural differences?
It definitely was not hard to adapt. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but Ukraine at the time, like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, was the second poorest country in Europe. Now with the war, obviously, it's the poorest country in Europe. So it growing up there, there's few things you can have that you'd consider luxury things. So when I came here, to me, it was like going to the dollar store and my mom buying me like $1 worth of like little dinosaur figurines, and there's like 20 of them in there. I was like, oh my God, I'm the luckiest girl in the world. Like you wouldn't see that there. Like we just don't have that. So it was little stuff like that. And then there, again, being a country that's not one of the big countries where, people import, export, like we ate what's in season. So I remember arriving here and going to a store and there was like a mango in like December and I was like, "Oh my God." Like I've never even seen a mango to begin with. Like I just heard of them, so I've never tried one, but I was like, "Wow, like it's the winter. They have mangoes in grocery stores." So like it wasn't so much a hard adjustment as it was like, "Wow, like this place is like magical to me as a person who's never had that." Probably the biggest challenge really was just learning the language because I didn't speak it. So But even as a child, like you went to school, they kind of gave you ESL classes and most people helped you. Like I vividly remember the first like couple days being like, I have no idea what people are saying to me. Like, and then just all of a sudden, just like I was fluent. So,
Mhm.
you know, you kind of pick up pretty quick.
Yeah, was it a challenge as well for your parents? Like with you being, of course, I would assume the only English speaking person in your house. Would you be the person that had to kind of translate and make sure they understood everything?
For the most part, yes. So my mom did a very good job with before we moved, like this was when, you know, you had to apply for visas and prove that you could speak a bit of the language, etc. So she actually spent a couple years before we even came learning English, etc. So she had a little bit of English. It wasn't perfect. It obviously got better as time went on. My dad to this day is not very good at English. Like he's okay, but not extremely fluent. Like he still has some troubles. So growing up and up until now, even like I still do a lot of the translating, and there is like, you know, you do, and I think a lot of immigrant children will understand this, where it's like, you know, you're 10 years old and your parents are like, oh, speak to the bank, what do they want? And I'm like, I
Mm,
don't know anything about banking, right? So it's like it's one of those where you almost kind of have to learn stuff a little bit quicker because you do have to kind of help translate some stuff.
understood. And then, of course, can you speak a little about your journey into pro wrestling? How did you get started?
Yeah, so since I watched with my dad that one time when I was like 8, I became extremely obsessed and this was like my thing. I was like all I thought about was wrestling. I just read wrestling biographies, I'd watch all the DVDs, you know, get all the magazines, whatever. So I knew fairly early on that I would want to start wrestling. So I would say like around the time that computers became a bit more popular in households, I kind of started looking up like where can one train to be a wrestler. So like obviously you learn that you're supposed to be, I don't know, 16 in most places, 17 with like a parental consent or 18. So I knew I had to wait a little bit, but I found a training school in Toronto that was called Squared Circle Training. It was run by Rob Fuego. He trained the likes of Gail Kim, Taylor Wilde, a bunch of notable names. So like it was one of the more notable schools, especially in our area. So I kind of kept a close eye on the school throughout the years because I looked at it fairly early. Like I was like 14, 15, and I was like, okay, this exists. So I kind of kept looking into it. And then by the time I was 17 and a half was the first time, like I was almost done high school. And that was the first time I kind of went out there and just went to visit the school and then kind of expressed my interest, saying like, hey, when I'm done high school, I want to train here. So
And were a lot of the other students around the same age, or did you find it intimidating being one of the younger ones?
I would say most people were in their early 20s. There was maybe a couple, like the girls were a bit younger for sure, but the guys were early 20s. I definitely found it being intimidating, not just being one of the younger people, but it's just, you know, it's like it's your dream and you come in, and I personally also didn't have like a crazy sports background, like I never did gymnastics, anything like that. So in general, it was just like, okay, this is my dream. And it was almost like do or die mentality for me. So it was just very intimidating where I'm like, I really hope I'm good at this, you know?
And yeah, after speaking with Rob several times myself, I know that he tends to find the best in his students. Of course,
Mhm.
he accepts basically everybody and anyone. Not that that's a knock on you or your career or anything like that, but what I mean is, how would you describe his training methods, and how would you apply it to when you got out there in the real world and started working with Maximum Pro, Smash, etc.?
So I truly found Rob to be, I guess what you describe now, coming back as like old school trainer. You obviously read, you know, in autobiographies how hard some of the pro wrestling training is, where it's like you come in and they make you do all these crazy workouts and they kind of push you and they make you do drills and stuff. Where so he did a lot of that, but he also was very, very keen on like, I want you to know how to do everything in terms of like you should be good at psychology for wrestling, you should be good at chain wrestling, like traditional wrestling, high flying stuff, Mexican stuff, Japanese stuff. Like he taught you everything. And I felt very, very prepared when I went out there because I know a lot of schools don't teach those kind of styles. And he also liked to push you. So if he knew that there was potential in you and you yourself didn't have some kind of, confidence to doing something. Like I remember he'd be like, "Oh, just get up on the buckle right now." And it's like, what are we doing? He's like, "Oh, just get up there." So you get up there and he's like, "Okay, now backflip off it." And I'm like, "What?" It's like, what are you saying? It's like you're freaked out. But he's just very like it was very old school. Like he knew how to push people, he knew how to get people to do things the correct way. And I'll never forget too, like before I made my debut, it was very much like a couple of months almost, I want to say, like almost like every class, at the end of the class, you'd be like, okay, you're gonna have a match with someone. So this match you're gonna be heel. And then like it's gonna be 10 minutes, plan it. And then the next one will be like, okay, your face, and then he'll have you do different stuff and he'll critique you and he'll tell you, like, okay, you need to be louder or you were too quick. So like he really, really made sure that you knew what you were doing before he kind of let you go out there. So it wasn't just, oh, I'm gonna take people and they're paying me and then here you go, like, yeah, go out there, you were trained. It was like, no, if you can't, show him that you're good enough and you're grasping everything he's teaching you, he will hold you back until he gets you to a point where he's confident you'll do very well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And especially I wanted to talk a little about that kind of development of your character, because I know that he had been very encouraging when you started playing the Russian character, the heel character.
Mhm.
Did he kind of help in discovering that, or was that something that you put together yourself?
So that was kind of something that he came up with. I know that I was like, I knew that, if you're from another country and wrestling, especially, it becomes one of the things that you can definitely probably have your character do. And I remember thinking, like, one of the things I don't want to do is be like a character from my country. And
Mhm.
then Rob's like, "Oh, yeah, this will be a great idea." And I was like, "No." But, like, it actually kind of helped me come up with different ways of expressing myself. Like, at the time, I didn't realize, but like, my character didn't really speak English. So it's like, how do you get heat from the crowd without speaking English? Like, yeah, you can say something in Russian and then they get mad at you, but it's like, how do you really use your expressions or what you're doing to get the character or to get people around you to hate you, right? Because it's easy to say something in English that pisses someone off and then they get mad at you, right? But
Right.
if you're not speaking English as a character, it's like, how else do you do that? So it was a really cool learning experience for sure for me to kind of go out there and be like, okay, how do I make this work with what I've given?
Yeah, and can you talk to me a little about sort of the evolution of the character? I mean, I'm assuming that you stopped doing that at some point down the road, because I know I've seen the recent videos, of course, teaming with Silesia and doing the vibe check gimmick. Did you kind of grow out of that, or like was that your call, or like how did you evolve from that?
Yeah, so it was one of those where I took quite a lengthy hiatus in wrestling. I took almost like 10 years off essentially, and I kind of did other stuff. And when I came back, I kind of knew like, yes, there's some people that know me by my Russian character, and I wanted to keep the name. I still wanted to keep Nikita. I liked the name, but I felt that it was kind of outdated. It's like you can always go back and recycle that, and there's always going to be somebody from a rival country that's a heel, but I wanted to kind of do something a little bit more. I wanted to be a little bit of a different kind of heel. I still like I've changed it to being from Ukraine because that's where I'm from. And then I kind of wanted to up my character into, as much as I speak a different language, that's not exactly what the character is about. The character is more about being like an international diva superstar of sorts. That's a fitness model, etc. So I just wanted to kind of challenge myself in different ways and be a different type of heel as opposed to what I was before. So I definitely like I know a lot of people were still like, "Oh, like are you going to come back because you speak a different language?" It's a big asset, which it is, but I just felt like it's something one can always 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 go back to because it's there. So I
Mhm.
wanted to try something else and see if that would stick, and if not, I could always go back to what I was doing. But so far I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I think it's working. So
So let's talk about the time that you spent away. You mentioned the 10-year hiatus, of course. What was there anything in particular that prompted that, or what was the motivation for that?
yeah, so I ended up breaking my leg at some point in my wrestling career. I was training to go to New Japan or doing some tryouts for them, and then I ended up breaking my leg, and it ended up being quite a significant break where I broke my tibia, my fibula, part of my Achilles. So there was like up to 6 breaks all over my leg. I chose not to do surgery, and I was kind of going through a recovery process, and which took a year within itself. But within that amount of time, I was also thinking, like I had a herniated disc in my lower back as well that I needed to heal. And that was also a wrestling injury. So I figured I need to take the time to heal. And while I was doing that, like I needed to go to school. I needed to kind of figure out what I'm gonna do in case I need a plan B. So I spent quite a bit of time on myself and just on recovery and trying to figure out, is there anything else in life that I'd want to do? And, like as much as it was nice to take some time away, like I never really stopped thinking about wrestling. And it was one of those where once I was fully recovered, I was like, oh, maybe I should come back. Should I come back? And then kind of by the time I hemmed and hawed, it was COVID, so I couldn't come back, so it kind of took a little bit longer than I wanted it to take. But it definitely wasn't a planned like 10-year hiatus, but it just ended up being one. And then I was like, oh my God, like I miss it so much. And I'm so happy I came back. It's been a blast.
Yeah, talk to me about you did mention it right there, but talk to me about the challenge of the early years of COVID. And especially because you obviously still had friends in the industry. How were they able to cope, especially being on the indie scene, with the empty arenas and just the lockdown in general?
It was really hard. There were a lot of people that talked about how, they got trained through COVID and it was like, they had one match and then it was COVID. And then it was like, okay, like schools are locked down. Like, obviously, there's some schools here and there that were able to get around it and have only a couple students trained, but like, it just got really weird. Like, a lot of people felt like they missed out on a couple years of their career. And it was more so for the newer people that were starting out. And I have a couple friends that, like running wrestling promotions is almost primarily what they do. And that's also hard because you can't run anymore, right? So it's like it was very hard for everyone and it was uncertain times for sure. And even for me during the comeback, like I was like, oh my God, like I can't train. There's no like, I was like, is this what it's meant to be like? Like I can't come back now, and it was definitely a hard time. Like I remember at least watching WWE and seeing the empty arenas there. And I was like, as much as, one can appreciate a really good wrestling match, like it's like the crowd is what makes wrestling, right? Like wrestling's not wrestling without the crowd. Like you can do MMA or UFC and it's like, yeah, there's no crowd, but it's still like a fight and you're kind of watching for the fight. But for wrestling, it's like you want to hear the crowd reactions. You want to tell a story, and that story is kind of what gets the crowd into it. So when you don't have that, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is very, very strange.
Mhm. And of course, continuing your story, how did you end up getting back into the fold and what prompted that decision eventually?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of thought about it every once in a while and I was kind of like, okay, I kind of want to come back. Do I come back? What do I do? And like you said, I still kept in touch with quite a few people in the wrestling industry and like we'd hang out and they'd talk about it or sometimes we'd attend like, WrestleMania or Royal Rumble together and I'd be like, "Oh, I miss like everything about this." So I think one day, like after COVID, I was just like, you know what? Like life is short. I miss it. I really want to come back. So I reached out to a couple of my friends and I was like, I don't know, like, obviously Square Circle shut down a few years ago.
Mhm.
So it's like, I don't even know like where I'd come back, where I'd train, like, are there schools around the area? So I was told one of the better schools and one of the only schools in the area is Hamilton Pro Wrestling, at which Rip Impact is the head trainer. And I knew Rip from my first run, so and I still had him on Facebook and everything. So I was like, okay, like I'll shoot him a message and hopefully he remembers me. If not, then like send him a few pictures. I don't know. But I was like, hey Rip, like, we wrestled together years ago. Like I kind of miss it. I was wondering if I could come back and kudos to him. He did remember me and he's like, yeah, yeah, I remember. And then he was so welcoming. He's like, stop by, let me know. Like, we can do like a private session, see how it is. And, like part of me was nervous too, because like my leg healed, all's fine. Like, it's been years, but like the disc in my lower back, like as much as it's healed, it's like, I started getting into heavy lifting and stuff like that aggravated it. So part of me was like, oh my God, like, will my back be able to handle all the bumping? And it was just one of those where it's like I didn't have expectations. I kind of thought I'm gonna try. If my body can't handle it, then it can't handle it. At least there's like a peace of mind there. But also, if something comes of it, then that's great. And I remember we did a private session and I left that private session like crying happy tears because I was so happy. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe I took this much time away. And, I haven't really been watching as much either. And it was like, it was just to have me in there for an hour and then things to kind of like start kind of coming back to you. And, like Rip was like, wow, like you really remembered stuff and like you have some good habits still. And like it really made me feel good. Like he made me feel like I could really come back and do something. So he kind of took me on for the next few weeks or few months and helped me prep for my return. I'll be forever grateful for him for that because I pretty much couldn't have asked for a more perfect trainer to come back to because like I love Fuego, but Fuego's so old school and I feel like he'd have all these expectations. But like Rip was very like, hey, if you can't do this, we'll work up to it. Or like, I'll remind you to do this. Like he was very encouraging. And I think that's what I needed because part of me was like, oh, like, can I be there with everyone else? Like, am I still good enough? Do I remember? Am I athletic? And it definitely, he made me feel like I could do it. So.
And going back and talking about a little about your character work, because I mean I've spoken with Arda, I've spoken with Rob, and they each speak very highly of you. And of course, from my own interactions, I can tell that you're a very happy-go-lucky, you're a very pleasant, respectful person. Was it difficult for you playing such a heel character for the majority of your career?
You know what? No, it comes so much more natural to me. And I don't know if it's just natural to be mean to people in like a character setting. Like I always say for me, if you ask me to play a baby face, like I almost wouldn't know how to do it because in real life, it's like you can see someone, you can kind of interact with them, you can joke with them, and it's more one-on-one, but it's like I don't know how to act in terms of having a whole bunch of people that are looking at me be like, yeah, like she's so great. But like for a heel, it's so easy. Like at least for me, you come out, you have a certain demeanor about you, and like it's just a lot easier in that regard, like to look at like, oh, what constitutes like a bad girl or like a prissy girl or a girl that like everybody would hate. So like I come out with a cell phone, I'm self-centered, like I take
Mhm.
selfies in the middle of my match and people get super pissed. But it's like as a good guy, it's like, oh man, like I don't know, why would they look at me? Like it's so much harder. So for me, it's definitely a lot easier to play the heel.
Understood. And of course, then you started working more with Silesia, one of your closest friends, of course, doing the whole vibe check gimmick and forming the tag team. How did that all come about? And can you speak a little about the chemistry that you guys have with each other?
Yeah, so I mean, the two of us go way back. I think she started maybe 6 months after I did with her training at Squared Circle. So we've always kind of had a connection. We've always known each other. We've kept in touch. And yeah, like since coming back, I found that, the wrestling scene in Ontario with women, it's the most women wrestlers we have is in Ontario in terms of Canada, but like it's still not that many. So we found that when coming back, it was like we were just constantly wrestling each other pretty much everywhere. Like we go to Quebec, we go all over Ontario, and it's still me versus Silesia. And we had really good in-ring chemistry. But the two of us outside of the ring are also very similar. We have very similar personalities, and our characters are kind of similar to a certain degree. And I remember we did a triple threat match in Greek Town. It was me versus Silesia versus Miley. And in that triple threat match, like Miley was the baby face, Sleazy and I were heels, and we kind of got to play around and play off each other's characters. And after like that was probably one of the most fun matches I've ever had in my career. Like we came to the back and we were both so happy because we're like, oh my God, like we had so much chemistry. It was so fun. It was so natural. Like we were able to get stuff to work together pretty well. So we both kind of said, like, you know what, like one of the things that Ontario doesn't have too much of or at all is a tag team for women. So we thought maybe we should try and do something like that. So we pitched it to Smash, which we ended up kind of running with it from there. And it's been extremely fun. We've been having a really, really good time with it. However, it has been a little bit more difficult because of the lack of other female tag teams within the Canadian wrestling scene. But so far, so good. The vibe check's been fun. Our characters, people have been commenting on it and loving it. Like the fans are all about it. It's been really fun. So we're looking forward to continuing doing it more and getting out there a bit more.
And of course, you the partnership with Silesia, and then moving forward, what this is kind of a two-part question. Firstly, what is your motivation to keep pressing forward, and what are some of your uh, goals in the business long term?
So, in terms of the tag team, like the motivation to keep pressing forward for us is just, it kind of goes back to the whole like women's evolution in wrestling. Like if you look obviously prior to 2016, a lot of it was like bra and panties matches or 2 minute matches or nobody cared. And a group of women pushed for it, and now there's tag team belts, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So as much as it's kind of demotivating when there's not a lot of women's tag teams, it's also like, okay, well, why don't we just start it? Like like there's plenty of guys where two guys are a tag team and they get booked in a match with two random guys who are not a tag team, So it's like, why can't we do that for women? Like we can. It's just it's gonna have to take some time and some convincing. But at the end of the day, like I want to open that door because if you look, like there's a few women's tag teams in the States, and then there's also up until the last few years, it hasn't really been heard of like of two women coming up as a tag team. But then you look at someone like the Iconics who have been a tag team for the majority of their careers. Like I think there's a place for it. And I think sometimes having two people together run a gimmick is better than one, right? So
Mhm.
to me, I really hope that one day we're able to kind of open that door a little bit more and expand it from being like, oh no, sorry, we just need one girl versus the other, to like, no, you know what? Like we're a tag team. It's okay to throw in two other girls together because eventually somebody somewhere will be like, you know what, I had fun. I want to start a tag team, right? Like it becomes more fun. There's more you can do. So I'm really hoping we're able to open that door. And I hope that as a tag team, we can at least get something. Like it would be amazing to go to, TNA or AEW for like one of their dark matches as a tag team. Like I think that would be super cool because, those promotions have women's tag teams as well, right? So I think it would be pretty amazing for us to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, and of course, mentioning AEW, you did wrestle a few matches for them this year. Mariah May, Athena, and the other one against I'm
Anna Jay.
sorry, Anna Jay.
Yeah.
How can you tell me about your experience in AEW and any kind of feedback that you received from those matches?
Yeah, you know what? It was super fun. I came in, and every time you come in as an extra somewhere, like you're just grateful to be there. You don't know what you're gonna do, if anything. And it was a pretty unreal experience to have them include me in their programming literally every week that they were here in the Ontario area. It's like the first match was Athena, and then it was the Anna Jay match, and then it was the Mariah May match. And that one was really like, oh wow, because it was on Rampage, and I've never had that opportunity. So it was pretty unreal, like, just getting to work with people who are professionals, getting to work with, agents for the matches. I did get some pretty positive feedback from the wrestlers and the agents. And, I never really expected coming back to really make it anywhere or go anywhere. That's always the hope, the dream, but it was never the expectation. So it was really cool to see, I came back, I worked hard, and then I got like three in a row. So I'm really proud of it and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And it was just extremely fun. And I really hope I get more opportunities like that.
Yeah, and of course, speaking of opportunity, you have an opportunity at the vacant title this coming weekend in Niagara Falls on Sunday. It
Mhm.
is run the event run by Neo Pro Wrestling, of course. You'll be facing Casey Spinelli for the vacant women's title. Can you tell me for those actually that are not familiar with the Ontario indie scene and especially this promotion, can you tell me a little about how this match came together?
Yeah, so one of the things people may not know is that Neo is one of the longest running promotions in Ontario. It was one of the biggest promotions in the early 2000s, and they took a little hiatus as well for a bit. And Neo was actually started back up, I want to say either a year and a half ago or like 2 years ago. So they just recently started up again, which is super cool to be part of, just to know that like they're revamping something that was, one of the top levels, top promotions in Ontario, and to just be part of it. So they did a round robin tournament. Obviously, being a promotion that's returned, they don't have any champions at the moment, especially for women. So they did have a bit of a round robin tournament between myself, Silesia, and Casey Spinelli, in which, it goes by a point system. So like if I beat one person, I get a point, the other person gets a point, and then whoever has the most points faces the person with the second most points. But we all ended up having 1 point each. So originally it was supposed to be a triple threat, which I wasn't able to make. At which point Spinelli defeated Sleazy and eliminated her. So now it's a final match between myself and Casey Spinelli, and I'm really excited for it because I think one, obviously Casey Spinelli is a legend in Ontario, you know, one of the top indie wrestlers out here, so it'll be super fun and I'm super excited to wrestle her, but also it'll be an honor just to be, you know, featured in the bout for the championship. Like I'd love to win the belt and represent Neo, but I'm also just so grateful for the opportunity to even be featured in that match, you know, and to be given that opportunity. So I think it'll be a really good one.
Yeah, and before we wrap, do you have anything else to add or promote?
Yeah, just follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. My handle is at Nikita Wrestles. Follow me. I try to answer any questions that fans have. I try to respond to as many DMs as I can because I love my fans. So, you know, holla at me if you have any questions. And yeah, it's been super fun. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And yeah.
Thank you. And be sure, for anybody in the Niagara Falls region, be sure to check out the Neo show. It is Sunday, June 9th. Bell time is 5 p.m. and is following actually the Niagara Falls Comic Con weekend. Chris Jericho is actually expected to appear on the Saturday. And on this show, TNA star Eric Young is in the main event. He was the first Neo champion. He'll be facing the current champion, Tariq. And of course, other TNA stars as well. Crazy Steve, Diener are on the card as well. But for sure, check out Nikita's match, and we'll see you there on Sunday.